It is Country Viewpoint here on Flow FM, and to continue our look at what's happening across the South Australian Victorian border, across that border bubble at the moment, we've gone straight to the top, and we wanted to get a member of the Transition Committee for South Australia on, and we've managed to secure the Police Commissioner, Grant Stevens, for South Australia. He joins me on the line right now. Commissioner Grant Stevens, welcome to Country Viewpoint.
Thanks for letting me speak.
It's great to have you on. First of all, our friends across the border bubble area be listening intently right now. As you know, there's been a little bit of confusion down there as to what the ultimate source of information is in regards to online in particular, where people should go for information. What advice have you got for our listeners today on that?
Well, I'd suggest there are probably two sources of information that people should be keeping an eye on. And the first place to go is the state government website. So that's sa.gov.au. That has got a comprehensive list of references that people can actually examine, frequently asked questions that they can have a look at, that gives them some clear understanding of exactly what the current situation is for South Australia. And the other source is the South Australia Police website. That's police.sa.gov.au, and that will certainly give them some indications as to what the current restrictions are and frequently asked questions as well. So they're the two primary sources I'd recommend people check. And we do have a hotline. If there are any elements that people don't clearly understand, ring the COVID hotline. That information is also available on the website in terms of those phone numbers, and the people on that hotline have access to all of the current information and have the ability to clear up some of those hard to understand elements.
Yeah, there have been a lot of online links floating around at the moment, and I'm not sure if it's been discussed at the level of the Transition Committee about correct messaging and how to make sure that everything online is up to date. Google has its own algorithms and puts up what it likes on Google searches. But I've certainly come across some conflicting links where in some instances when you put in a Google search, you'll bring up something which you think is up to date and it'll actually be outdated. It'll be last updated 8 days ago. Has that been spoken about in the Transition Committee, about the importance of deleting old links and updating new links and making sure that online, at least, the messaging's pretty consistent?
Oh, that is looked at, but just to clarify for people, the Transition Committee doesn't actually look at that sort of thing. The Transition Committee's job is to find a pathway out of these restrictions that doesn't compromise safety but gets things moving as quickly as possible. So it has a key and specific role. We have a team, as a part of our Emergency Management Act response, we have a team that looks at public information and it pumps out the information that people need and puts it in an easily understood format. So we update that regularly. My caution to people, if you're using Google as your primary search engine and you type in phrases, you're not necessarily going to get the most up-to-date and relevant information. And my recommendation is that you go to those two websites I spoke about before, because that information is always current and up-to-date. Using search engines doesn't necessarily guarantee you're looking at verified, authorised information or the most recent information.
That is very true. In terms of what those restrictions across the border bubble are actually at the moment, a direct question for you. We started this investigation to find out about what sporting clubs could do. As you know, there are a number of sporting clubs across that border bubble. At the moment, recreation and sport is a reason for people to be able to cross from the Victorian side of that 70-kilometre corridor into South Australia. Is that right?
That's correct. We changed that just about a week ago, I think. It was recognised that, I think coming out of the 7-day lockdown we had in South Australia, and part of the focus was on enabling community sports to get back to their competitions and finish the winter seasons. And it became obvious, and I suppose on reflection, something we should have thought about earlier with the border bubble, that community sports were heavily impacted by the situation between those communities that live on the border of South Australia and Victoria. So we included as one of the reasons to come into South Australia from Victoria, or vice versa, to participate in sporting activities. So hopefully that was something that's freed up a bit of movement in that border bubble environment and enable people to get on with life as much as possible close to being normal.
From an operational standpoint, I imagine it's created some challenges for SAPOL in terms of making sure and of compliance in this area. How have you gone resourcing-wise trying to make sure that people aren't coming across the border that shouldn't be?
We've had resources up there now. Actually, it's on reflection. We had a brief moment in time in 2020 when we could stand down all of our border checkpoints, which was excellent. The sooner we get away from having to do this, the better. It's almost un-Australian to have these border checkpoints in place between states and territories. But at the moment, because of the obligations we have to ensure the safety of the South Australian community, we do have those checkpoints in place. The resourcing issues are being well managed within the South Australia Police, but I just need to say that those cross-border community members who are coming across the border quite frequently, that their willingness to work with the South Australia Police, cooperate, support us has been exceptional. I'm hugely impressed with the attitude of people who are affected by this. We understand the frustration it causes, but that's not demonstrated to our police officers. People are doing their very best, and we appreciate that.
Is there an understanding inside the transition committee that these guys are effectively, there might be on the 20 kilometres on the other side of the border, but they're effectively, from all intents and purposes, members of the South Australian community. Many of them live a lot of their lives and work in South Australia. So is that understanding there at transition committee level?
Oh, it certainly is, and it's another clarification. We have a different group that actually look at the restrictions that have to be imposed, and that's between the South Australia Police and SA Health. So when it comes to imposing restrictions, we have one mechanism, and then we have a separate mechanism. It's like a fresh set of eyes to look at how we can lift them as quickly as possible. The implications of these restrictions are not lost on the people who are making these decisions, and we know that there are people who, for all intents and purposes, consider themselves to be South Australians, and probably the only thing that they have a connection to Victoria with is probably taxes and vehicle registrations. But the reality is, we live in a federation, and we have these borders, and those borders do dictate how we manage our communities. So those people who live in Victoria technically are bound by the Victorian restrictions as they may be at any time, and when we come into South Australia, we have our own rules and regulations and pieces of legislation that are applicable. So the creation of the border bubble was our effort to accommodate these people who live so close to South Australia that being part of the South Australian community is intrinsic in their daily life.
Yeah. Now, last question for you today. I know you're a busy man and you need to get back to it, but I was speaking to one of the local border MPs, and I won't go into the politics of this because that's not for you to comment on, but he was talking about how closely he works with the Victorian Crossborder Commissioner, Luke Wilson. Now, I imagine you probably do as well. Do you think there's a call for or a place for a cross-border commissioner in South Australia that could be appointed to do a similar job?
It's not something I'm really in a position to comment on. As my role as Commissioner of Police means that when we have a major emergency, I become the state coordinator, and my obligation is to ensure that the South Australian response to the emergency, whatever it is, is being effectively managed and coordinated. So that's my obligation. The Premier is the responsible minister for emergencies, so I'm reporting to the Premier in relation to how we're managing these things. I'm not sure that a cross-border commissioner would achieve any different outcomes to what we have at the moment, although I would acknowledge that it may give people who live in that border community a sense that they have a voice, but I would also ensure people understand that we do hear what's being spoken about in these cross-border communities. We do receive submissions. They are taken seriously, and we review how we're managing that cross-border bubble virtually on a weekly basis through the Transition Committee.
Sure. Well, Commissioner Grant Stevens, we appreciate your time here on Country Viewpoint. Thanks for giving us a really comprehensive look at what's going on there, and we wish you and the Transition Committee and everyone at SAPOL all the best in what are pretty difficult times at the moment.
Thank you, mate. And can I just say again, I just want to pass on my acknowledgement to the people who are affected by these restrictions, those people in these cross-border communities. We acknowledge the impact these have, but we certainly appreciate your support and the way you cooperate. It is appreciated.